Hi guys, welcome to episode 3 of our podcast. You're here with John and Ilan, and this week we're going to be focusing on lockdown restrictions, and we're going to try not talk too much about coronavirus because we know that you've heard it endlessly for months now. We're just going to try and talk about the different restrictions in different countries and see where what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So, how are things getting on with restrictions over there?
Okay, so well, I'm assuming you're talking about South Africa, which is where I'm at right now. Um,
Mhm.
so we were in full lockdown, could only leave the house for groceries for about 5 weeks, and then it became just like an hour a day for exercise. So basically, full lockdown for another, I think, 3 weeks.
So you
So
had zero, you couldn't leave under any circumstances.
yeah. We had basically no contact with people outside the house for 5 weeks, and then very limited contact with people outside for another 3 weeks. Um,
And
yeah.
did did South Africa see their cases going down a lot, or?
So the numbers were pretty low throughout the initial lockdown, and then after after I think it was 6 or 7 weeks, the numbers started to go up a good amount because it was initially centered in Johannesburg's province, Gauteng, and then Cape Town, which is where I'm at now, became the center of the epidemic in South Africa.
Because
And
white people hate masks.
I mean, I don't know why. Maybe because it's the most international city in the country. Who knows? But
Right.
then it got really bad here, and we were under those restrictions for a good amount of time. And then on June 1st, we went to what's level 3. So, you know, you can go exercise, you can go to the park, you can go see small groups of people and have food delivery. And more recently, restaurants have opened up in some capacity. No, yeah,
So
yeah.
so
So
that's where
that's
you're
where we're
at
at
now.
now. Yeah. The
Right. Right.
only the major restrictions now are there's no sales of tobacco, and
Really?
yeah, none, none.
That's probably
Yeah,
driving Nikita mad.
it's driving a lot of people crazy. It's driving a lot of people crazy. No, that's probably the biggest issue that people have with the current lockdown,
Okay. Right.
because
That's kind of a weird one, isn't it?
it's nonsensical. I mean, their official reason is uh, that smoking makes the coronavirus worse in people, and they think that people will be sharing, you know, spliffs and stuff, so it'll be passed around. But the problem with tobacco is that you're not really getting rid of smokers by outlawing it. You're just giving it to the underground
And you're pissing
tobacco
people
people.
off.
Right. Well, that's the one thing. But I mean, the health reasons, people are still going to smoke their tobacco. People are still going to, you know, people are still going to be smoking. It's just going to be way more expensive. And especially for people who can't really afford it, it's kind of a fuck up, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the major issue right now. There's like there's other restrictions like no drinking alcohol in restaurants. The hours for selling alcohol are restricted. The hours that you could be at like parks are limited, but those are pretty easy to work around. It's
Yeah.
the tobacco
How
thing
long are you
that's
going to spend in the park anyway? Like,
right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's actually fairly chilled here, except for the tobacco thing. But the tobacco thing has got people up in arms, and there's been
right.
court cases against it. So what's it called? British American Tobacco was suing the government so that they would be able to sell cigarettes here, and their reasoning against it was to list tobacco as an essential service. Um, that's kind of their legal argument, and
Mhm.
the High Court ruled that there would be a 14-day review of the restrictions, and they would have to be amended. And that was a few weeks ago, but it got pushed back. The
Okay.
tobacco court case got pushed back to August. So that's where we're at now.
By August, it's going to be lifted anyway, I'd say.
I mean, who knows? Uh, I know some people in the tobacco industry here are saying they don't expect to be able to legally sell tobacco until next year. So it's kind of a dog show. And there's some whiffs. There's some whiffs of corruption. The president's wife, the former president Jacob Zuma's wife has some connections to underground tobacco sellers.
Right.
So people are thinking there's some fishy business going on there, especially because they haven't really
Kind of like a
provided
shakedown, or
yeah. I mean, shutting down the legal sales of tobacco so that those underground sellers can make crazy money selling tobacco for crazy prices.
yeah. Well, I suppose like I would be all for getting people to smoke less and less.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think the solution is to just rip it off the shelves and leave it at that. Like, you know.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. It's been as an approach, prohibition of any
doesn't
substance has
work.
been shown it
Yeah.
doesn't work. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you just create more problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's bizarre, but actually South Africa has accelerated in terms of cases. They are testing a lot more now, but also the hit rate on coronavirus
Positive.
tests are
Right.
they've gone up a lot. So now I think it's something like 120, 130,000 cases, and they're up to I think yesterday was the first day they hit 10,000 cases in a day.
Okay.
So
that's quite high, yeah.
It's going up, yeah. So now South Africa's situation has gone, even though their lockdown was pretty severe, the cases are going up like crazy.
From what you've told me, it kind of sounds like they did the lockdown at the wrong time, that they did it too early, maybe.
Yeah, that might be the case. And they might have lifted things early.
All right.
The problem, I think, a big part of the problem with South Africa is that there's a huge informal economy that a large section of the population relies on, and it's not really feasible for a big section of the population, it's quite impoverished, to stay inside and away from other people all the time. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's been really hard, and in terms of educating people and getting the materials out to people, that's been, I think, the biggest struggle.
Right.
So in terms of where we are in the center city, it's not so bad, and people are taking precautions. You do get the occasional case that's in a store, and then the whole store has to shut down. But for the most part, life has come to a new normal here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so we're kind of in a funny old position. So this is my first trip to Dublin in 4 months, and Dublin was really the only place that kind of saw any significant cases in Ireland. So it has about a quarter of the population, has 50% of the cases, has always had at least 50% of the cases, I think. I wouldn't swear to that, but I do think that they've had at least 50% of the cases all the way through. And then on top of that, if you walk down the street in Dublin, you pass 300 people. You walk down the street in Ennis, you pass 30. So there's that aspect to it as well. It's not just that they have twice as many cases per capita, but you have way more exposure to people. So you have to work on the basis that you are going to be exposed to coronavirus in far more circumstances in Dublin than you are in Clare, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So are
so
people taking different precautions in Clare and in Dublin that you can tell?
well, yeah, for sure they are. Yeah. So like I think Clare has always been a little bit more of a backwater, like more country folk, a little bit more traditional. Um, they're not they're probably not the most conservative place in Ireland, but Dublin is definitely the most progressive place in Ireland. Um, so a lot of people up here seem to be wearing the masks. Um, so like yeah, sorry, just on that point, we had our peak in in around the 20th of April, right?
Yeah.
And I'll just show you our graph there. So like that's basically our graph.
Okay. Yeah.
It's reading backwards to you, but you can see that it's
Early April.
yeah. So well,
Mid early.
uh,
Yeah.
about about the second or third week of April.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but so and like a lot of those cases would have been in Dublin and so on, and uh, I felt when we went into lockdown, I thought that like Ireland was doing really well. I was really proud of how our government was handling it.
Yeah.
Um, and and over time, I've become less proud of how they were handling it, and I kind of felt that they went from um, treating this like a serious health risk to treating it like a fucking theater.
Oh,
Um,
is that what's happening now?
I really felt that that's what happened. Now we have some other kind of things that have happened with our government. So
Yeah.
in January we had an election, and when did we? Christ, I can't even remember when we had an election. But it was we haven't had a government for 5-6 months, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the old government was basically holding control because that's how it works until the next government gets formed.
Yep.
The old government stands guard basically. So Leo Varadkar, our Taoiseach, who is a medical doctor, was Taoiseach Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He was he started off doing a fairly good job, and then I kind of feel like the politician side in him came out, and he started point scoring again, and he started mishandling. I felt he was mishandling the situation.
So
But
sorry.
I don't.
Continue. Yeah. Finish your thought.
So like the really big issue with how all of that went down is that for the entire lockdown, or we didn't really even have a lockdown, certainly not as severe as what you had. But I would argue that it wasn't even a lockdown. Like, for the entire time, he the government treated the west of Ireland in the same way as Dublin. So there was twice as many cases per like
Per capita.
100,000 or
Yeah.
whatever in Dublin, and you were more likely to be exposed to one of those people just from the population density and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. But they didn't have a different plan for the countryside versus, and when I say countryside, I mean all towns and villages outside of Dublin, pretty much.
Yeah.
So they had the same plan for fairly dense city as they had for the middle of the countryside. So that is to say, when there was a 2-kilometer restriction in place, so the most lockdown that we ever had was you could walk within 2 kilometers of your house.
Okay.
Right. And that was just from a point of view of getting exercise and so on and so forth.
Right.
Going down to the shops. You could actually break the 2 kilometers if you wanted to go to the shops.
Okay.
And that restriction, at that point in the restriction, I think it favored country people more so than city people, because it is possible that you don't really have a proper park within 2 kilometers of your house, and even if you do, there's a lot of people using it. Whereas, like, I was walking around my house, and like I'd go on an hour-long walk, wouldn't see anybody, which would always be the case. That's not like, you know, I'm not saying that's because of coronavirus. That's just what country living is like.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
But and then so that kind of suited the country living people a bit. And then I think that was particularly difficult for people living in the city. And also, like, at that time, everybody was a bit unsure of what's going on here. Are we all going to die? You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The
um,
beginning of the scare.
yeah, of course. Yeah. Everybody was a little bit more scared than they needed to be. And then it went to like 5 kilometers and you could meet a couple of friends. And that's when it kind of gets to, it swings very dramatically into city people's favor, because most city people, all of their friends live within 5 kilometers, or a lot of their friends live within 5 kilometers of them.
Right.
And like for a number of them, their families are living within 5 kilometers and stuff like that as well. Whereas like I still had no friends that I was able to visit within a 5 kilometer radius.
Yeah.
And I think like,
how
yeah,
was this enforced? Was it where?
So largely I think the Gardaí did, the police force did a really good job on how they handled it. They kind of, for the most part, it was left up to be socially responsible. So initially there were laws that were brought into effect that were like, the police can detain you for breaking these rules. And then when we were going from phase 1 to phase 2, I think that those rules expired, those laws expired. And for the most part, like, I think people kind of, I think maybe Ireland's like a small enough country that we do still have a grand sense of community.
Yeah.
Like, whereas in the States, like, it might be more broken down. And
Yeah. What's the population of the whole country? Like 4 million something?
the Republic of Ireland is like 4.5 million.
Yeah.
I think it's like 4.3 or something like that.
Yeah. So that's like half of New York City.
Right. Spread over an entire country.
Yeah.
I think we have one of the lowest population densities in Europe anyway. Dublin, as cities go, has a pretty low density as well. But comparing like city and country within Ireland, obviously Dublin is way, way higher.
Huge difference, yeah.
Than just about anywhere else.
Yeah.
But what really just pissed me off about the whole thing was that, like, a 20 kilometer radius in Clare is probably equivalent to a 3 kilometer radius in Dublin. You know, that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of being able to go to the shop and being able to see your loved ones or your friends.
Yeah, everything's more spread out. Makes sense.
Yeah, and at no point, like, so we're essentially out of for lockdown now. I went to the pub for the first time on Friday night.
So pubs are open there.
Pubs are open since Monday last, but like, yeah, I didn't go to the pub for the first few days after it opened, for multiple reasons. Like, I felt like the pub would just be swamped anyway.
Yeah.
Like the people who would go in on the first day would be the ones that would be like fucking licking your face, trying to talk into your ear, like, you know. Yep. So I didn't want to go at that early stage anyway. But yeah, I went on Friday and had a really, really nice meal, couple of drinks. I felt like the pub probably wasn't legally sticking to the guidelines. Like, I wasn't particularly
in terms
thrilled.
Of like masks and distancing.
No, their PPE was good, but there was 2 people sitting at the bar, and like, my problem with that is that, like, so you can't ask a customer, like, all the staff were wearing these kind of face coverings that just it's not so, like, it's a clear perspex kind of layer, so you can see their face through the mask, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And so they were all wearing that, but the customers weren't. And there was these 2 ladies sat at the bar, and like, I was like, if one of them had COVID, everybody in this bar would have COVID because they'd be coughing in over the counter, getting it all over the glasses, getting it all over the taps on the bar, on to pour the drinks and stuff.
Right.
I was like, that is like, out of all the rules that you might say are like stupid or whatever, like having nobody at the bar is a good rule. And that one they were breaking. Funnily enough, they were actually sticking to most of the other rules that I could see, but breaking the one that is probably the most damaging of them all.
Yeah.
Because like if there's a guy sitting behind me with COVID, he's very, very unlikely to give it to me because he'd essentially have to like cough up like that over and like put it into my airspace.
There we go. It's beginning.
That's how it starts, man.
Can you get it through the computer yet? Can you get it through Skype yet?
Yeah, sure. It's a computer virus.
It's ready. Yeah. That's the next evolution.
Skynet, man. But yeah, so I wasn't particularly happy that they were breaking probably the most important rule to follow, but they did seem to be keeping to all the other ones. So, I imagine that the guy who's managing this bar is not a microbiologist or an immunologist or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he probably didn't realize that the one rule that he was breaking is actually the most important.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the most important one.
And this bar was in Clare.
No, in Dublin.
In Dublin, okay.
Yeah. Like I don't think I'll be going to a bar in Clare for a while yet. I'm okay with going in and doing a bit of shopping in Clare, but it's actually almost better because the shops have always been a little bit more empty in Clare than they would be in Dublin.
Yeah.
And normally you'd say that's a bad thing because the shop doesn't have as much of a selection and all of those kinds of problems. But the one upside of it is that, like, okay, I don't have to be as clean, I suppose, like myself.
Yeah, as careful.
I'm not. Yeah, exactly. I'm not as worried. So, for example, like for I think about 10 days now, or maybe even 2 weeks, Clare has not had a positive case.
Oh, okay.
This is an area with over 100,000 people living there. The last time I looked, it was like 103,000. So it's probably about 110 or 120,000 now living in Clare, and has not had one positive case in like 10 days or more.
Wow.
So that's obviously not including the people who were diagnosed before that might still have it, right?
Right.
And I'm just talking about new cases.
New diagnosis. Yeah.
I think there are 2 or 3 in the hospital that are being looked after. But like, so that, obviously that's like it's a pretty safe environment. Obviously I'd still be saying wear your mask. If everybody wore their mask, COVID would be gone in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The mask really does make that much of a difference. And like people's idea, like I even said it myself. My friend was wearing his mask, and I had mine on, but it was really irritating my face. And and I turned around to him and I was like, oh, I don't know, I'd nearly prefer to get COVID than wear this fucking thing. Obviously joking.
Yeah.
But or at least exaggerating. I don't know if I was joking, but I was exaggerating at least. And but the point of the mask is not actually that you're protecting yourself, because it's not fantastic for protecting you, but it is really, really good for protecting the environment, which in turn protects everybody else.
Like keeping your particles from spreading.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people just miss that. Like, we could do away with all of the restrictions if everybody wore their masks.
I've heard
all the time.
Yeah, I've heard the mask thing, and the indoor-outdoor thing is the other big thing I've heard. Is
what's the that it spreads a lot more
being
indoors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
so
Yeah,
So it depends on what country you're in there as well, because like the air conditioning systems
that's true
are
too.
like massive spreaders, and obviously like in Ireland, like we just don't have the like if it is 25 degrees or whatever, um, we just try to enjoy that because it's so rare that we get into the 20s. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not like we're turning on the aircon to cool it down or anything like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But but in countries where you have like habitual hot weather, um, those those places would be a lot more susceptible. Like the difference between indoor and outdoor would be far bigger when you've got aircon almost everywhere. Like in Vietnam, I can imagine that would get out of hand very, very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, for us, I'd say the gap is probably smaller.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in the States is it's like a case study in what not to do. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and
How embarrassed are you right now?
how embarrassed am I? I mean, it's all degrees of embarrassment, like you're a certain level of embarrassed with the stereotype of America, even though you know that that's not how everyone is, right? Like how
Yeah,
outsiders see America. Uh, it grows when someone like Trump gets elected and you see kind of the depths of the ignorance that exists. And then it grows more and more and more with your awareness of each issue and how we're failing on each issue, whether it's guns or the environment or abortion or so like basically race relations, everything, basically every
mm-hmm.
issue. We're just so far, healthcare, we're so far behind other developed countries, and the gap between what people like what how Americans think of America and where we actually are is so staggering. It's breathtaking, and
Yeah,
to see the coronavirus and to see how poorly we've handled it as a large community.
yeah.
And because as you said,
It's not
I
minorities of stupid people.
yeah,
It's it's
it's
majority ignorance.
huge, or
Yeah.
plurality of ignorance at least. um
Well, I'd say it's a majority of ignorance at this point because like um, if it was if you were only talking about multiple minority groups, like we'll say the like Baptists, like the people like the Western Baptist Church, who like okay they only number a couple of hundred, and they could result in tens of thousands of people getting cases, right? But at a certain point, when it comes to something of this lethality, you get the majority around them who should be saying, "Go fuck yourselves. Our job is to protect us as well. So
yeah, so
your freedom of speech and freedom of whatever is
but
secondary."
that's the thing in America, is that we've turned this individualist spirit and libertarian streak into
Yeah,
something that's pretty dangerous, like anti-science, anti-public health, anti. It's the same with vaccines, right? It's a huge growing problem in America, at this anti-vaccine fervor, and it's driven by this anti-government, anti-restriction, everything.
anti-regulation basically. Like that's a
Yeah,
general.
and the thing is with the U.S., it's a federalist system. It's each state has a certain amount of control over what happens in the state, and then the federal government has a level of control over what happens. Before the virus hit, the U.S. was rated number one in terms of pandemic preparedness.
Mhm.
Just because we have our CDC, which is very highly thought of. We have a number
It's
of
essentially one of two centers in the world. Like the CDC, and then there's one other one, but I'm not sure where it is. But basically, like
their
I think the
whole
CDC
job
is essentially
is
number one.
the whole job is to plan for these kinds of situations.
Yeah,
And
but Trump disbanded the pandemic. preparedness team when he came into office in like 2017.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It was like a death by small cuts in terms of that. There were small cuts being made to the actual preparedness, and then obviously when everything struck, there was kind of there. You know, it started very slowly in the states. It started for a couple of weeks. There were in a handful of cases, uh, mainly focused on the West Coast and in New York City, and the thinking was like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll just go away. So nothing was done for a couple of months while there was this tiny, tiny amount of cases.
Yeah,
And then it just blew up. And at that point, things could have been done to, so then lockdowns were put in place and, you know, whatever, and life went into lockdown and blah 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 blah. But the problem is that people didn't take the guidelines seriously about PPE, about social distancing. So you would see, for example, like those famous pictures of spring breakers going to Florida and thousands of people clustered together on the beaches and in bars. And uh, so it was this kind of like, oh, it's not going to actually affect us kind of mentality. Um,
yeah,
that really got it going here. And then once the lockdown started, there was no federal nationwide standard. There was a recommendation that states could or could not follow. I think it was something like 8 states didn't do a formal lockdown, and
mhm,
there were huge variations in what was allowed between each state. And obviously, each state reopened at different times. So
right,
it ended up being this haphazard kind of situation where it blew up in California, in Washington State, New York, New Jersey, California, and those places kind of got a handle on it with the lockdown, and uh, they haven't gotten rid of it, but they've definitely uh, they've slowed the curve, right? They've slowed things down, but
right.
it's exploded in other places, right? So in Texas, Arizona, uh, like some Midwestern states, some Southern states, it's just blown up. And now,
Can, can I interrupt you for a second?
yeah,
Sorry.
do it.
I'm absolutely, I really need to pee.
All right,
So sorry, man.
we're gonna take a quick break, pausing here now. Sorry about that, everyone. We had some
Sorry.
technical difficulties. Um, so what I was saying, states started to lift their lockdowns, prompted heavily by the federal government, and this is where it went from, you know, we're all in this together. Let's come together to overcome this beast. To wow, this is really taking a toll on the economy. At, and the conversation started to change. You know, for a lot of people, it turned from a public health thing to um, we're not going to survive if things continue like this. And you know, those kinds of balances need to be struck, obviously, and you can't just not have any economic activity whatsoever,
Mhm.
but you do need to be driven by data and by facts. And what kind of happened is that it became this political schism of uh, opening reopening versus staying shut, where the reopening was the conservative viewpoint of let's get the economy back going, and we're just going to have to bite the bullet on the health side of it, and the liberal
That
side of it.
is
Yeah,
that is a real concern. Like, I do understand.
absolutely.
Even
The public health aspect of the economic impact in the U.S. is also huge because you've had millions and millions of people lose their job, and the primary way that people in America have health care is through their jobs. So
right.
it's doubly devastating because not only do you not have your income and security, but you also don't have your health insurance in case you actually do get sick. So
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's the economic part of it is a definitely a legitimate factor and a huge factor, should be a huge factor, but it just got twisted into these battle lines, you know, of like you can't open anything up because it's not safe versus it doesn't matter, we're all going to get it anyway, we have to open things up, like throw it to the wind, right? And
and
so
obviously both of those extremes are wrong.
wrong, both are wrong,
Like
both are wrong, it's somewhere in the middle
nine,
as
nine, 9 times out of 10, the extreme polls, more than 9 times out of 10, 999,000 times,
out of a million.
999 out of a million, it's wrong. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
but
exactly. And yeah, but then it calcifies into those battle lines, right? So then it became a partisan thing, and that's where kind of the mask wearing thing became partisan as well. Became a battle cry for individual freedom, you know, and so now you have this kind of mix of people who, number one, fight against are against wearing a mask because they think it's against their personal freedoms, right? So you have places who are instituting mask requirements and people going against those because it's an affront to their individual freedom, right?
yeah,
And then you have people who are just not being careful, are not social distancing, are not wearing masks because they are not concerned about the health impact of it. And it's those two groups that have been driving the the
the
the
spread.
the reason that U.S. is number one in deaths and in cases.
But I think that second category is kind of disappearing. So I think most people um, are coming around to well, at least elsewhere, they're coming around to the idea that it's not so much a personal concern. It's that if they infect 3 people, and those 3 people infect 3 people, and so on and so forth, that they could, like, the butterfly effect is what kills thousands.
Of
And it,
course, and yeah, and you know that's and like I said, it's this divide. So for half or however 60%, whatever part of the U.S. population, it agrees with you, and then there's that chunk, that 40 to 50% that disagrees.
do you think it's as high as that?
I think it's got to be over 20-25% of
Yeah,
people.
well, I'd put it in or around the same. Like, so Trump's base is considered to be about 30 to 35%, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
So I would say that basically his
Probably
base
around there. Yeah.
roughly equates to those people.
And then I would throw in probably an extra few percent of people who are just not being careful.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, to be
So
honest,
maybe
man, like
so maybe
I, I'm
40%.
I'm probably not as careful as I should be. Like, so I lost my mask uh, Friday night, right? We're recording on Sunday. Um, and like, so yesterday I just spent the whole day without a mask. Whereas if I was actually taking it seriously, I should have immediately bought, like, not that I'd be afraid to go out or anything, but that my first stop when I do go out is in a pharmacy to buy a new mask.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No,
so,
yeah.
so, so
And
everybody is a
but
little bit negligent.
but this is the thing, but that's the different but there's a difference between taking small shortcuts, or maybe being with a group that's bigger than it's supposed to be, or maybe giving your friend a hug, or it's those little things that you shouldn't do, but most people probably do them because otherwise life is pretty desolate.
Yeah,
It's those little things that, but to the extent where it's causing the numbers that it is, I would
yeah,
say that the fault, the huge part of that fault is in people who are just not going along with it. And like you said, the whole point of the mask is to prevent others from getting sick, right? And
Mhm.
so a lot of people on the right are saying, I'm not going to wear a mask until I feel sick. And
Right.
obviously, by that point, it's too late.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it would help at that point, but
Right.
yeah,
I mean,
no.
it would be something, but it, who knows how
It's
long
better than
you've been
not. It's
sick.
better than not wearing one when you're sick.
Right.
But,
Yeah. I mean, it's
the-
scary because you look at the number of deaths in America, and it's crazy. It's out of control.
yeah. No, you basically have handled it as bad as
As
anybody could have.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and it's ongoing. This
yeah.
whole
Well,
situation.
from what I hear, soon enough, you, you're going to be toppled by Brazil. Like, it looks like Brazil are really coming up in the ranks, and they're going to challenge you for that top spot soon enough. They've got
Yeah,
a little bit of a higher population, I think, but
us. We have
no, they have, I think.
a population.
I think so. I'm not certain, but you're at about
I think
320
I
or
think they're the spot
330.
under us, actually, if I'm not
Really, yeah.
mistaken. Yeah,
Uh,
it's not far. We're gonna look it up right now.
yeah. But
Okay.
yeah, no, you're third.
Yeah.
So Brazil must
So
be fourth.
Brazil, it has a few million less. Yeah. Okay. So according to this count, it's actually fifth. U.S.
Oh
has
yeah,
about 330.
the
Brazil
one
has
I'm
about
looking at.
210.
Yeah, the one I'm looking at has them seventh.
Seventh. Yeah.
210.
Yeah.
210. Yeah.
So I mean,
Okay,
it's
I was way
a
wrong
bit
then.
smaller.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 But their cases have just skyrocketed. They have Bolsonaro, who is essentially just darker Trump. It's like,
He's way worse than Trump. It's
he's worse. He's worse.
oof.
I feel like, okay, I don't know Bolsonaro that well,
But Brazil also has this authoritarian history, whereas the
yeah,
U.S.
they respect it a lot more. They kind of want to, like, they almost want to be I don't know, maybe like whatever, fucking dominated or suppressed or whatever. Whereas Americans have this idea that,
Well,
oh,
I wouldn't say that,
we're
but
the
like,
place. Well, no, that's the vibe that they're giving off, is that they seem to love this idea of strongman kind of stuff, and like
but
their history is
you know what leads strong men to coming into power is this. It's not a desire to be dominated; it's fear.
but like okay, well, if you look at the states, you've got multiple kind of ethnicities. They tend to maybe keep to themselves a bit, so like maybe you have like Latinos marrying Latinos more often than anything interracial. I don't know if you're the same as us, but like mixed race children often complain in Ireland about feeling that they're not part of either group. So
Yeah,
like, if you have a black and a white parent and they have a child, then that child is not white and not black, not
yeah.
both.
I
They
mean,
never say that they're both.
but that's the thing. It is a huge thing. I mean, that could be its own podcast episode
Mm.
um,
But
about mixed race. But
in Brazil, what sets Brazil kind of apart from America, I think, is that like all of that melting pot stuff that happened. It's not happening all the time. Like, it's not as much of a thing right now. I think that they tend to, like, they've got Japanese communities,
yeah,
and they had, like, the European, the Latin European countries like Spain and Portugal and Italy and places like that, all settling over there. So they had their melting pot, but they're not really melting right now, if that makes sense. Like, they're already kind of somewhat homogenized, I think.
I mean, Brazil is also a hugely unequal country, and
Yeah.
with a lot of actually like the to the extent which the U.S. is currently confronting the racial issue that it has, Brazil is still a few steps before that with their racial issues, because Brazil was one of the largest slave users of slave labor, and has a huge black population and has huge issues with their race relations. Even though
they're really compelling argument for like, let's just throw all of our DNA into a blender. Like, Brazilians are so attractive, I think. It's just like, you know, if we all just mix it up, we can all look like that, you know.
I mean, that's the dream.
But yeah, no, for the time being, I'm gonna have to stay being white, I guess. But yeah,
but yeah, Brazil. But that's what's scary about it, about Trump being as popular as he is in the States, is that you have someone who's so clearly anti-democratic institutions and impulses and ideals, who has become so popular in a country that's very fiercely guards this idea of itself as a bastion of democracy, as flawed as that idea is.
Yeah. I saw this fantastic. So you know that I love reading the comment section on Facebook, right?
Yes, yeah,
you know,
your favorite
that, like,
pastime.
Oh, for sure. And I think I might have seen the best line. Well, I personally found it possibly the funniest fucking thing that I have ever read on Facebook. And it was a Trump supporter in, Now Politics.
Yeah.
So they're a left-wing group, right?
Yeah.
And
left-leaning.
Right. Yeah. I think okay, they definitely have an agenda. All media in America very much has an agenda. Maybe you could make the argument that all media has an agenda, but definitely all media in America has an agenda.
Right.
And but they so is this Trump supporter in the comment section going, America is a republic, not a democracy. I was like, oh my God, you fucking, I'm so embarrassed for you. I don't even know who you are, but I'm really fucking embarrassed for you. Yeah.
Like that's it. Like that's the point you want to make there.
The one thing that person achieved was that nobody fucking argued with them.
What do you have to say to that?
No, I think like you just fucking let them off.
God. But yeah, no, it's been crazy, and it's been very interesting for me to watch everything happen back home from the outside.
Right.
Like, obviously through social media, I kind of see these battles happening online. And I kind of see what kind of lives my friends are living. I know what kinds of lives my family is living back there. And, but I'm not participating in it. I'm not talking to people. I don't know really how that many people feel about it. So I'm really just seeing it from the outside, and it's crazy because, it almost feels like a dream, like how could it be that people really think this, that people really are just not going to wear masks because they think it's, enslaving them.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
So as bearing in mind that like yourself and myself have different ideas of human rights, even like
we have a lot of different ideas. Yeah.
But would you support? Okay, well, you're familiar with how they went about containment in Vietnam. Like,
yeah,
the people who are in Vietnam right now are living a relatively normal life.
Yep.
would you support the draconian measures that the Vietnamese government took in the early stages, which looked severe,
Right.
in order to preserve the day-to-day life that all those people are now living?
See, that's the thing. Is that I don't even think that was even necessary. Um, I think, but that, yeah, like that, it's necessary maybe in a place like America where you have people who are just not going to follow the rules. Um, but there's a different culture of rule following and of authority and
They
of
love their government.
that's
Their government is very, very popular, and it's not artificially popular like
no it
Putin's, like, where he's stacking the
right
numbers.
yeah
They're like, the Vietnamese people love their government. Yeah,
and there's just culturally more of a respect for the community and respect for uh, the integrity of the nation and the integrity of the uh, whatever blah blah blah. So
yeah.
there's less of this individualistic streak anyway. I mean, I think the US is unique in how far we take it, but it almost feels like it wouldn't even be possible in America, because how would that even look? How would we even get to that point of a government being able to be so draconian, if considering how libertarian the impulse is there? Um, okay, so I'm going to go back to your question. Would I support it? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If the difference is dealing with a couple of months of not really being able to leave your house, not really being able to do anything, and then things open up and life goes as
It
normal.
wasn't even months, man. It was essentially a few weeks.
Yeah, yeah. But if it's between that and the current situation in America, like, come on. Like,
Yeah, it
number
should be a
one,
no-brainer.
yeah, number one, the economy's fucked. And it's not, and it's the recovery is going to be stilted because you still have to account for the fact that there's the virus out there, and people, what, 30,000 people have died in the U.S.
Yeah,
from it alone, and
yeah. So
that's
for
probably an undertone.
scalability, for scalability, like, the population of Vietnam is roughly, I think, a quarter of the US's.
Yeah,
So what you're talking about is the US, like, by putting in these measures that, of course, would be unpopular on day one, you get to have basically zero deaths. Like, I
yeah,
think there was one
exactly.
case that was a little bit questionable, that, like,
Right.
you.
We're gonna have to actually take, sorry, a quick pause. I need to take care of a couple of things here, but we'll be right back in a sec. And we're back. Sorry about that, everyone. John, please continue your point.
Yeah, sorry. So what we were talking about was that, like, the difference between Vietnam's reaction as an example versus the US's reaction as an example. And uh, like, if you scale up Vietnam's population to the same size as America's population, it's about like 3 to 1. It's 4 to 1. Sorry, 4 to 1. So it's like from 80 million up to about 320 million, I think. Um, so if you were to scale up coronavirus cases, that would mean that if the US had done something similar to Vietnam, you might have about 1,000 to 1,100 cases. And if you scaled up the deaths that um, Vietnam has had to America, you'd be talking about somewhere between 1 and 4 deaths. Or if you believe that, like, okay, I think that the Vietnamese numbers are a little bit sketchy on this one, because
Yeah,
there was one case that the guy got infected in Vietnam and he died in Cambodia. I would count that. I kind of feel like
yeah, yeah.
they appear to have shifted him out of the country when it looked like he was going to die. So I don't know enough about that, but just just for the sake of it, we'll say it's 4 deaths. That's still over 100
versus
times less.
130,000 and
Yeah,
climbing every day,
and climbing every day. Yeah,
and
yeah.
probably an undercount.
Well, I don't know about that. I imagine it is, considering every other aspect that I've seen
If you
in
consider
relation
the
to
severity, especially in places like nursing homes and stuff where
yeah.
they just haven't, you don't have enough time to, get
Yeah,
corona as the official reason.
I know that the British count, so their official count versus um, uh, their actual count is dramatically different. Whereas in Ireland, we count every case. Now,
Yeah.
those people that are dying in nursing homes, they might have died, right? And it's not really a big deal that the UK is counting it one way and Ireland is counting it another. The the only time it becomes relevant is when you go looking at the overall figures, and this is working in Ireland, this isn't working in the UK.
Yeah,
Ireland
yeah,
has
yeah, yeah.
a high percentage fatalities, and the UK doesn't, or whatever. Like so their average age, like the people who are dying, is probably a lot lower than ours.
Yep.
I don't know that for sure, but considering they're not counting people that die in nursing homes, I'm gonna wager that it's a lot lower. And because we're one of the only countries that literally counts every single fatality where the person has COVID, like our fatalities are somewhat high. Like, they're when you factor in our population and all of that kind of stuff,
Yeah. How
it's
many how many people are they saying in Ireland around now?
like how many a day or how many total?
Both.
How many a day is like one.
Okay.
I'll just check the total. I think it's about 1,600.
Okay.
But where it's so like when you're looking at the you could have people going. I I had this conversation with somebody actually where they were going, Ireland has way more deaths than America does. And I was baffled that anybody could even make the argument that Ireland had more deaths than like per capita. Like, the person
Right. Yeah, yeah,
was obviously smart enough to go per capita, because
yeah, yeah,
just looking at the base numbers, Ireland has never had more deaths than
yeah.
than
Yeah.
America. But um, so what? So I crunched the numbers on it. I put the population in over the deaths and so on and so forth, and it was actually closer than I expected.
Mm.
So Ireland was doing more tests at the time per capita than the US was. The US has passed us out on that now, and at the time I used that fact as kind of a symbolic win. And bearing in mind that we're all learning day by day on this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And like, given my background, I would claim to know more than your average person about infectious diseases and maybe coronavirus, even though I'm not currently working in that field.
Right.
But so I looked at that little fact, and I was like, okay, this is an endorsement of my opinion that we were handling the situation far better than America, which I still hold. I'm not like backtracking on that.
Mm.
It's just that so America now has more testing per capita. You're
Yeah.
doing a lot more testing per capita, but I think you're not doing the most in the world because I actually
No,
only looked that up. Uh, you're about sixth or seventh, but out of the big countries, you're doing the most in the world
mm,
by a reasonable margin. Um, I think I think you're actually like 25th, but countries like Monaco beat you. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
so like who cares about fucking Monaco?
right,
Like, you know.
right,
But so yeah, America is doing pretty well in terms of their testing capacity and stuff like that.
yeah,
But the problem is that you're in the fucking height of your pandemic now because you didn't react at the time that you should have.
yes,
And like, so when you got that initial data back,
yeah,
and like when Ireland got their initial data back, it was like, okay, let's take some mitigation, like, you know, let's react to that information and prevent the spread. Whereas America didn't do that, and
that's the thing. And the thing
um,
is, it's you can put all the measures in place that you want, but are people going to follow them? And that's the real problem.
well, that's a different argument because you
Right.
can
But
you
yeah,
can force people to follow them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But also, it's becomes politicized to the extent that places are not putting those into place still. Like
For
how
sure,
many?
for sure.
In fact, I think a few places in the U.S. had laws or people had proposed laws where cities in a state could not have a mask requirement, which is just like the height of ignorance to me. Like
So explain that one more.
prevent like a state law that would prevent cities from having a mask requirement.
But I mean, was there some sort of legal background to that, or like why did they? How do you
Polit-
how do you say that that's legally backable? Like, you know,
it's what do you mean? Like
like is there some religious, like, so within your constitutional rights there
it's
are a number of grounds that are backed up.
well, the
Um,
states have authority over like it's like in terms of who has the authority. It's for most things it's local, state, federal, right? So in terms of their constitutional ability to have those kinds of laws, they for the most part are. But for me, it's the idea that you're going to stop places from instituting mask requirements. That just seems so profoundly to be kind of the problem. And I'm not
yeah,
sure. I'm not sure if it actually ended up passing, uh, but it's come up in several states.
right.
Um, yeah, yeah.
I honestly, like, I don't know how many times I've said this to you since we met. We've known each other about a year and a half or 2 years, something like that.
Yeah,
More,
almost. Yeah, yeah, year and a half,
almost two
more than a
years.
year and a half.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Um, but like, I honestly think that like America is so far gone in their um, partisan kind of nature that like the
yeah,
country nearly has to fail. I don't know how it comes back from, like, you know, once one side stops using logic, you're done for.
yeah.
And the problem in America is that there are two sides. Like, okay, there are people in the middle that are still fairly logical. Like your swing voters make up about 40% of the country, maybe a little bit less. Um, and I would say that those people are fairly logical. But you've got your fervent left and your fervent right, and both of them just don't use logic at all.
Well, I think that might be kind of a simplification because I think there's fault lines, right? Where it's not so simple as like left, center, right. Obviously, a big chunk of people fall into that, but it's also, you can break it down further, right? So, like religious voters or urban, suburban, uh, right? So it's like a little bit more complicated than that. But I agree with what you're saying that uh, you have, for the most part, people who are not using logic, and like that's kind of this whole kind of idea of discrediting information instead of answering it, to me, is extremely dangerous. Um,
Yeah, I
of
don't stand for anything, but I stand against what you have to say.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
yeah, exactly.
it's
And
very,
all,
very, very
but
dangerous.
also when information comes out that is damaging to you, instead of you apologizing for it to or admitting to it or trying to
You
explain
what
it,
about?
attack the source of the information instead and try
Oh,
to make that and try to just delegitimize any negative information against
yeah.
you, to me is
Or or
incredible.
even or even admitting it, which, like, you know, Trump has a or not so much Trump, but his you know, the she's quite the attractive lawyer that he has, that does the press releases or something.
Oh yeah. Kayleigh McEnany,
Yeah, that
McEnany.
sounds like it.
Yeah. What's her name?
Yeah. She like, her approach is like, I'm not even going to fucking deny this shit, because sure as hell, if I do deny it, which, like, in the past she has tried to deny it, and
Yeah,
Trump goes, no, I fucking meant everything I said, it
yeah,
wasn't a
yep,
joke.
yep,
um
yep.
so she doesn't even try to deny it anymore. She just goes after them and goes, well, what about when you said this? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, don't be a hypocrite. Like, it's not really how
But
this
you're not really
works.
answering the
Yeah,
question. Yeah. Yeah. So that to me is very dangerous, of like
yeah,
delegitimizing information, to me, is extremely dangerous, and people being so vulnerable to fake information on top of it, um, is kind of this.
well, strictly speaking, that's not fake information. Like, you know, she's not
I'm
lying
not I'm
about
not
that.
talking about her. Now I'm talking about actual like fake information, like, you know,
Right, okay, sorry, yeah.
yeah. So people being so vulnerable to that, like people who are maybe don't trust certain sorts of information. Like, I have a couple of friends who are uh, not they have not really like traditional beliefs. They have more like they have a different way of seeing the world, like possibly more spiritual or more um, along different fault lines. And instead of just like the traditional political divide, they think about things in terms of like spirituality, and they think source of information are like corrupt, like all the media is corrupt, and the only sources you can listen to are like spiritual guides or like mediums or things like that. And it's
Right.
like and it's and it's that's where dangerous information can spread, where there might be some grains of truth. There's also like anti-vaccine uh,
Yeah.
crusades and things like that, right? And like
I,
conspiracies about like global health trying to take over, right? Global
yeah.
health authorities trying
Yeah.
to take over, and like blah blah blah, you know, or like
It's all,
5G, or like you're getting the corona from 5G or something.
yeah. It's being sent through the wires.
Yeah, exactly. So
You're getting too much screen time. It's giving you corona. Like,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
that's actually the level of fucking, yeah. That is
Yeah,
actually the level of
yeah,
argument.
no, but that's the thing. And if I mean, there are people out there who listen to that,
Mm-hmm.
which is very scary. Yeah, yeah, it's a bit crazy. I don't think the U.S. is alone in being vulnerable to that things, but I think we're particularly, because of how stratified and because of how libertarian and anti-authority and
Yeah, it's funny. Like,
anti-expertise a lot of the population is, that people are particularly vulnerable to that.
I've recently been like having the thought that, okay, so within a normal democracy, what you would be inclined to say is that absolutely anybody who has something to say should be given their chance to speak, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of, that's like how democracies have originally been designed, and that's
Yep.
kind of what we've valued all along.
Yeah.
And I feel that as time goes on, um, so like if you look at the examples that we have had in the past, like the the Roman Empire, and or the Roman Republic, which obviously became an empire, and the America is actually a good example. I think like um, where we all kind of had this idea about America for a long time, and now the the rust is starting to show. The
Yeah.
fact that it no longer represents what it once did, and
Yeah.
and being part of what was the American dream is becoming harder and harder for people to achieve,
Yeah.
and that it's increasingly becoming an exploitation rather than an individual endeavor. Um,
Yeah.
all those kind of things to me highlight that nothing works eternally, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
democracy is a great idea, and I'm not fucking speaking up for dictatorships or anything. I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
saying that like just because a dictatorship didn't work and the democracy didn't work doesn't mean that there isn't an option C that we haven't thought up of yet.
Absolutely. And I think that that's what we need to be open to. And I mean, especially as global challenges change, we don't know what direction the internet will take us. We don't know what direction
Yeah,
AI will take us. We don't know what direction climate change will take us. So we
yeah,
really just, the idea is that you need to be adaptable to these problems. And if you stubbornly cling on to uh, old ways of doing things or old ways of thinking, then
yeah.
it's just going to hurt everybody and make life harder for people. You know.
And and in a time where somebody like Kanye West, who, like, from a musical point of view, I like Kanye West.
Yeah.
But from a political point of view, I think he's the biggest fucking idiot in the world.
Yep.
Um, uh, the fact that he can influence the political sphere is really troubling.
I mean, we'll
Um,
see if he does. It's going to be very interesting to see what
well,
happens with that.
I think he kind of already has. Like the fact that
I mean,
like okay, it wasn't him, but Beyonce was going on about getting somebody released from prison, and it actually succeeded.
well, it was. I think it
Uh,
was. I think it was Kim Kardashian,
right? Yeah, yeah.
his
Sorry.
wife. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of it actually having an effect on the election, I think people are assuming it will, but we need to see. Like, I'm not going to take it for granted that it's gonna. I'm not even going to take it for granted that in a week he's still going to be doing this.
Yeah,
Because I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing with running for president in the United States. Like, no one's going to take you seriously if you're not going to at least try to pick up one of the party nominations,
right.
right? Because running as an independent has never,
Worked.
well, it's worked like 200 years ago. Like it hasn't worked in a very long time. Yeah,
And therein lies the problem, really, isn't it? It's like
yeah,
no outrunner can actually succeed, really.
but that's our voting system. That's the issue there.
Yeah.
Like that's the
Which
mechanics of voting. Like
we talked about that in episode one.
first one, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that like ultimately everything that relates to Black Lives Matter and um, uh, police brutality and things like that,
social
essentially
justice,
all,
yeah,
yeah, it all links back to the structure of your political system, and that it doesn't really promote change, which is why you have a relatively, like, so the majority of individuals in America are probably progressive, but the majority of lobbies in America are fairly conservative, and
Yeah,
it has just broken the system and made the majority of people politically unhappy, I think.
yeah, yeah.
So
And I think, I mean, the two parties no longer represent, I think, uh, or they don't represent. It's like the parties shift to accommodate changes in the culture.
mhm,
Um, but what's really interesting is how, because demographically, for the past 10 years, people have been saying the Republican Party is kind of in trouble because the US is becoming more diverse. The US is moving a little bit to the left in terms of that. US is, all of these things, people's views on like gay marriage, on marijuana, on the environment, on climate change, younger people overwhelmingly feel align with the Democrats on this, right? So there's been this feeling for the past 10 years of the Republican Party's kind of in trouble. And now it's interesting to see whether Trump's brand of politics has realigned things, right? Instead of they're going to drop the suburban, they're going to drop, are they going to drop the appeals to like upper middle class suburban white people, which has been a cornerstone of the Republican Party,
yeah,
and pick up kind of working class whites, which has long been a cornerstone of the Democratic Party, right? And they're doing that in a way that's cultural, that's not economic. Like their economic policy is very corporate, um, rich guy friendly, but in terms of their cultural tone, in terms of how they talk, it's very average Joe, blah blah blah, guns, religion, freedom, America, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so it's really interesting to see whether this is a permanent thing or whether it's going to go back to what it was, and then there's going to be bigger changes within both parties. But we'll see.
yeah.
Yeah.
I oh, I just got my my battery notification there,
How
but
much time we got?
just a minute or two.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Wrap it up.
but yeah, before we go, I just think like um, with relation to the U.S. system, I think I don't know if it's as evenly dispersed as all of that. Like the Democrats, I just don't think represent the left side of the population at all.
Mm.
What you're after taking is you're after taking a load of wealthy people. Like even the poorest Democrat is a fucking wealthy person, and you're with maybe the exception of AOC and that really new age
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Democrat.
Harder
And,
left. Yeah.
and it'd be interesting to see how she develops over the next couple of years.
Yep.
Maybe she'll stick to her roots, or maybe she'll become increasingly corrupt as she gets richer. Um, but for now, I would be inclined to keep my faith in AOC. I do believe that she's an idealist, and I do believe that she knows that she's in a position to create change. And like
That's the thing. Yeah.
fair play to her. And like the Democratic Party needs more people like her.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the problem with a lot of the just the American system in general is that it takes somebody that is roughly like AOC and over the course of their career pulls them to the right, uh, to the point that when you've got a right and a left, you don't have a right and a left. You have a right
Yeah.
and a fucking middle.
Well, it makes you think of, when you're in office, then you're worried about fundraising, you're worried about reelection. Those are your big things, you're worried about
Yeah,
maybe your alliances that you make in the house, so you're really, and you're worried about like big companies going after you and big donors going after you. So that starts to factor into your calculus. Um,
Yeah.
and DC, listen, DC is definitely heavily influenced, if not run, by the lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's quite hectic, and regulators heavily influenced by lobbies and by associations and things like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, that's for a talk for another day.
Gonna bring us out.
Yep. So thank you for watching, everyone. Please leave any comments or questions, and we'd love to hear what you have to say about this podcast, about other podcasts. And if you want us to talk about anything else, please leave a comment on our videos. We're so happy to have you guys, and we'll see you again soon.
All
Take
right.
care, everyone.